Welcome to our very first podcast. This is APT Beyond the Classroom podcast, and I am Alison Pattison. I'm the founder and CEO of Arizona Provider Training, and we are so excited to have our very first guest today. This is Nathan Buckles from Meridian Special Needs Planning. And Nathan and I were just talking, we've been working together for over a decade now. So, Nathan, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Meridian Special Needs Planning.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Allison. Very excited to be here. Excited to be part of the first podcast.
We're
That's
super
exciting.
excited to have
It's
you.
amazing to see where things have gone with APT over the years. So it's been a privilege and an honor to work with you. So
Thank you. Same to you.
thank you. So what we do at Meridian Special Needs Planning is special needs planning. That's why it's in our name.
Yeah.
And I have been doing special needs planning now. I am into my 15th year in doing this.
Okay.
And one of the great things that we do, like you mentioned, is we provide a lot of educational information to families about special needs planning and what does that all mean and
Yeah.
what's all entailed, things that parents need to know because, as a parent of a loved one living with special needs, the day in and day out routine is just so overwhelming, or it can be,
For sure.
that this whole idea of how do I navigate what happens when I'm not here, how do I navigate government benefits, all of these things can be very overwhelming. So that's what we really try to step in and help and provide the expertise and the knowledge to the families.
Yeah, it's awesome. I've had the privilege of hearing your presentation many times.
Just a few times.
Just a few times. But I'm always like, wow. I mean, it's so important. I know our families really benefit and appreciate your insight and your expertise. I know, so I wanted to let our audience know that we are going to continue doing the workshops. We offer them probably every month, every
month, maybe every other month.
Yeah, and there's it's a 2-hour presentation, and so we do offer the free CEUs so they can get CEU continuing education credit when they join on that call. But just wanted to give our listeners kind of an overview of just some of the kind of important nuggets that you would say could give them kind of an overview of what we talk about on those workshops, what you talk about.
Yeah.
And then kind of how, I mean, we will offer those again, but kind of then how to, what that looks like if they want to move forward with kind of meeting with you one-on-one.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we cover 4 main topics during the workshops: legal, government benefits, financial and budget planning, and then what we call lifestyle planning. And so the idea and the concept here is that we want to at least educate our families, our parents, our providers with enough information so that they can be an advocate for their loved one. So they can help to make sure that the plan that they want to have in place is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
One of the things that we say at the beginning of a lot of the workshops is the reality of the situation is if you don't have a plan in place, in other words, you don't have anything legally written down. The good news is there is a plan in place, and it's the state of Arizona's plan. But the bad news is that it's the state of Arizona's plan, right? Yeah. So we don't want to leave it up to the state to make decisions about who's going to provide care, who's going to be there, those sorts of things. Yeah. And so one of the big foundational pieces of planning is making sure that they have a proper estate plan established. And that is comprised of wills, a family trust, a special needs trust, which is really the key document that is there to provide a way for parents to leave assets to their loved one, but it will not disrupt their government benefits. In other words, we could leave thousands and $1 million to a special needs trust, but their child would still receive free healthcare through access, cash benefits from Social Security, services through DDD funded by Altex, et cetera, right? So that money inside of the special needs trust won't go towards their $2,000 asset limit, okay? So making sure that a proper estate plan is established is really a key fundamental piece of the planning. Not only making sure that assets transition properly, but we also want to make sure that we have the right people in the right places. One of the big things that a lot of the families do experience, it doesn't apply to everybody, but a lot of the families, when their kiddo turns 18, they need to consider the idea of maybe becoming court-appointed guardians of their loved one.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then a will is really, really important, because that's the document that says, who do I want to have as my successor guardian? Who's going to step in after me?
Right. Okay. And do you help with that piece as well?
Yeah. So everything that we discuss on our workshops, through the workshops, we do. So we have an attorney on staff who prepares all of the legal documents. And then I help assist families with the government benefit coordination piece, making sure that their child is getting everything they should be getting. And that they're, receiving all of the benefits that they're eligible for.
Right.
And then we also help walk them through a financial process, because that's one of the other big things that I would say that gets missed. A lot of people have an idea that there's some sort of planning that I need to do. When I talk about a special needs trust, a lot of people have a general understanding of, I think, I kind of know that there was something, that needed to be done. But the conversation a lot of times does not then lead into how much does a trust actually need to be funded with in order to provide for their child. Because the reality of the situation is that a trust is just a document. The trust allows things to happen. But if the special needs trust is not properly funded, in other words, there's not enough money in it, or maybe it never gets funded because there was no plan about how that's actually going to happen, then the trust really doesn't serve a purpose, right? And so that's something that we walk families through in the workshops as well too. And then part of our services is that we help them through a pretty comprehensive financial planning process to help determine, what does your child need? What's their budgetary need? How are we going to make that happen? We have to incorporate mom and dad's retirement into that, because even though a lot of us think we're going to work forever, we're not. And so what does that look like? How do we make sure mom and dad get through retirement, and then making sure that there is enough that the special needs trust can be funded properly, right?
Yeah.
And that can be very overwhelming for families, that piece of it. Getting an estate plan established is not as terrifying, I guess you could say, as then really looking into the financial aspects of this, right? And so that's, again, unfortunately, I feel like that's an area that does not get discussed very often. And so what you do is you leave families with an amazing estate plan. You have documents that are going to serve them well. But if we have no plan around how things are going to be funded, then the reality of the situation is those documents aren't going to be able to do what they actually intended them to do. Right. So helping families through that is a big part of what we do, help them navigate that process. And then government benefits. So one of the other things, a big chunk of what we talk about in the workshops, is what are all the different benefits available to their kiddos? Everything from the healthcare side to Social Security cash benefits. We talk about some survivor benefits that a lot of families don't know about. A lot of families are aware of SSI. That's a pretty common understanding in our community. But there's another benefit that's available to their kiddo that goes beyond SSI. And so we help to figure that out. What do those numbers look like, and what is that going to, how much is their child going to receive through that? And then also making sure that they're just eligible and they're getting everything that they should be getting. Our society 30, 40 years ago decided that we need to have things in place for these individuals that just can't provide and can't do the things that they need to do for themselves. And so we're all paying for that, right? We're all paying for those services through our taxes. So one of the things that we talk about with a lot of our families is, let's take advantage of that. There's things out there available for your child, and you are paying for that, whether they take advantage of it or not. And so helping them to navigate through that, and what does that look like, and what benefits are available, and And all of that is a really important key piece, because a lot of times, and this is where what you do with APT is so important, is the providers that are out there that are providing the services and things like that. You have to take some steps before you get to the point where you can have those providers.
Right.
Making sure that you're actually getting the services that you should be getting, right? And so we help to navigate families through that as well too.
Yeah.
And that's actually kind of where our name Meridian came from. Meridian is actually a nautical term, like the Meridian line.
Oh, I never
And
knew
so our tagline is kind of Meridian Special Needs Planning,
Yeah.
helping families navigate
Okay.
through this complex
Yeah.
world. So that's kind of our goal and our ideas, helping
it.
families through that.
Love it. Well, I know just the workshops that I've been on, it's super impactful and super helpful to families because, like you said, it is overwhelming. Do you ever have families who already have something in place, but they just want to make sure that, like, to go over it with you to make sure that they're good, or if they need to make any adjustments?
Yeah, absolutely. We get that all the time.
Yeah.
And I kind of liken it to if you get some sort of major diagnosis, cancer diagnosis or something like this, typically you're going to go out and you want to get a second opinion about things, right? If it's a big enough deal, you want to make sure that what's happening is happening correctly. Things are being done well, right? And so, yeah, we do. When families come through any of the workshops that we provide and they've already got some planning documents in place, they've already got an estate plan in place, we will review those documents for them for free.
Okay.
And we'll let them know our opinion. Our attorney will take a look at everything and to help to determine the biggest thing is, did what you create is it actually going to do what you intend it to do? Because in special needs planning, and this is something that is such a niche.
Yeah.
This is such a specialized type of planning that even the most well-intended estate planners, attorneys, what have you out there, they just may not know the ins and outs of what needs to happen. And language becomes such a huge issue. The language in the documents has to be done well, and it has to be correct, or else it can be left up for interpretation by the government agencies. Because inside of special needs planning, not only are we worried about things being legally correct, right? Like the documents are done legally well, we also have to make sure that they're done from a standpoint of the bureaucracy that's involved in your loved one's life. So we have to make sure that the language is going to comply with the protocol and the compliance and the things that access, all tax, DDD, Social Security, that all these different government agencies require. We have to make sure that the language is correct. And so we do review documents that are already in place, and if we need to, we can make the adjustments needed to do that. We can also, a lot of the families that we deal with have nothing in place, right?
Right.
That's okay.
Yeah.
But let's make sure that we get a plan done. And so obviously we can create everything from scratch, or we can take what's already in place and basically enhance it and make sure that it's going to do what we're intending it to do.
Yeah. That's awesome. What other information would you say you would like to share with families or providers specifically about the process?
Yeah, I would just say that it can be, or it can feel like a very overwhelming process, because we're talking about what happens when I'm not here tomorrow, right? As mom or dad, or as a caregiver, what happens when we're no longer here? Who's going to step in? Who's going to take over? How do we make sure all these things are going to happen legally? Yeah. It's one thing to have a conversation with a brother or a sister to say, hey, you're going to take care of him or her when we pass, but that's not anything that's going to be legally binding. And what your intention is may not be what happens if we don't have the correct documents, if we don't have the correct estate plan in place. Okay. So the biggest thing that I would say is, and that's really why we're here, is we want to take something that can feel very overwhelming and huge and we want to put it into a process that is actually doable, and helping families through that process step by step.
Yeah.
And having somebody there alongside them to guide them through that is really important. The other thing that I would say is, and whether or not a family uses Meridian Special Needs Planning or not, and I mention this on pretty much all the workshops that I do, you just want to be real careful about who you do involve, excuse me, in your planning. Because, again, it's such a unique area of planning that a lot of folks just don't have the knowledge or the expertise to really understand what they may be doing is going to cause huge problems down the road. Okay. And so you just want to be real careful about who you do involve in your planning, making sure that somebody has experience. That's really the biggest thing in special needs planning is experience. There's really not schooling that you can go to. That seems to be changing. And excuse me, as this gets to be a bigger and bigger subject and more people are impacted by this, you're going to see things shift to where there will be some actual education and some things available out there for professionals. And that is starting.
Yeah.
But at this point, experience is really the best kind of knowledge, right? The best way to know that somebody knows what they're doing because they've been doing it for a long time.
Well, and that's why I so love working with you, because we've been working together for a very long time. I know families that have used you. I trust you completely, and I would not ever recommend someone I didn't trust, our families. And so I'm so thankful for our relationship, our professional relationship, that we can, kind of lean on each other to get those families in going in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. That is such a huge part of it is trust.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about major things that can impact the livelihood of their child. And so we don't take that lightly.
No, not at all.
And that's one of the biggest things that I love about doing this job is not only do I, of course, get to make money doing it and provide for my family, but we get to help families. Yeah. And it makes such a huge difference. And parents coming in worried, having trouble sleeping, just what's going to happen if I'm not here?
Yeah,
there's so
much anxiety around
such a huge question around that. And so to provide them some peace of mind is just amazing. So I feel so blessed that I get to do this as a profession, helping families get some peace of mind and get some surety around the fact that at least we know if we're not here tomorrow, we know what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, there's no question.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's a big thing that I hit home with on families that we work with is that our job is to make everything black and white. We don't want to have any gray. Yeah. You have gray area inside of legal documents or things like that are left up to interpretation. That's where you start to run into issues. Yeah. And so what we tell our families is you tell us how you want things to happen, and then we're going to make it black and white so it happens that way.
Yeah. So what does it give us, just a kind of a picture of what a typical meeting with a family would look like? So if they have already some things in place, or if they are starting from nothing, give us kind of a picture of what could I expect if I were to meet with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the families that we meet with are coming from a workshop with APT or other providers that we work with. And so they have some general knowledge, and they typically at least know who we are from a screen.
Right. Yeah.
We used to do them in person, but not so much anymore. But so a lot of times they're coming in with at least a base knowledge of that. But we do get people coming in that are just referred to us now as well too, that we've never met, what have you. But typically what we'll say is in that first meeting, if you do have any documents, bring a copy of those with you. So in the consultation, we meet at our office, which we're over off of Shea in the 51. So kind of like right in the middle of the valley. So we will review the documents. We'll talk through those if they do have the documents in place. And then if we see some things, of course, we talk through all of that. And then we basically ask, hey, what are you here for? Like, what's your concern? What questions do you have? We'll go through those and then typically take them through, okay, here's what you need after we've kind of gone through all that. Here's what you actually need to have in place. And here's how we're going to do that. And here's how much it's going to cost you. And here's the process, how long it's going to take. Okay. And then if somebody is walking in with nothing in place, they don't have any documents yet, we basically just start the conversation off with, tell us about your child. Who are we here to kind of talk about, right? Yeah. And again, what questions do you have? And basically, after 10 minutes of chatting with them, we have a really good idea of what they're going to need to have in place, whether that be an entire estate plan. Sometimes a family trust is not needed. And that's one thing. If we're helping the families and if they don't need something, then we don't need to do it. Right. So yeah. I would say 9 times out of 10, most people are going to need a family trust, but sometimes they don't. And so we're going to walk through that with them and figure out exactly what they need and what they don't need. Typically that first consultation, it is free, especially if they come through. Well, I should say it's free if they come through a workshop. Okay. So anybody who's attended any of our workshops and then meets with us, there's no cost for the consultation. Okay. And typically those consultations are about an hour long. Okay. And then at that point, if they decide to move forward, kind of walk them through the steps, our process to have the estate planning piece done, we typically tell families we can have it done in about 8 to 10 weeks. Okay. So it doesn't need to take months and months and months. Okay. Some of that depends on how quickly they get information back to us, of course, but we do our best to, once we have all the information we need, we build the draft of the document. Our attorney will build out the draft of the document within a couple of weeks. And then from there, we're just fine tuning if anything needs to be changed, edited until we get to a final version where they're coming in to sign and get everything executed. So it's a process that doesn't need to take 3, 4, 5 months. Yeah. And we've heard that people will come in and they say, well, I worked with this attorney or that, and 6 months later, we're still working through stuff, Yeah. The other thing too, which I don't mind talking about at all, is that we don't bill by the hour. Okay, we've determined that the amount of time and the amount of work that goes into these plans, we just have a flat rate fee that we charge families, and again, depending on exactly what they need would determine, what that rate is going to be. We don't do billable hours, so you're not going to get a situation where you pay a few $1,000s down and then 2, 3, 4 months later, we're asking you for another couple $1,000s because we've gone over the amount of time that we allotted, or what I'm saying. Yeah. So we don't do the retainer with billable hour things.
So it's just a set rate. At the consultation what it's going to be, and then you can plan.
They know right up front exactly how much it's going to be, and there's not going to be any surprises about more expense through that process. Right. Yeah. That's awesome. And then one of the things that we always tell families is once they've worked with us, we've gone through the special needs estate planning with them. We are there as a resource for them ongoing, especially when it comes to government benefits. Yeah. We do a whole coaching session with families when it comes to SSI. Awesome. So as their child approaches the age of 18, we'll sit down with them and do a 30-minute coaching session with them to prepare them for that interview process, for that application process. Amazing. Yeah. And our goal there is just to help to try to make it as a successful process as possible. For those of us who have dealt with government agencies before, they're not always the easiest to deal with, right? So giving them some tips, some things to be aware of, things like that.
To be prepared,
to be prepared for. Yeah. And then one of the other services that we do also offer is guardianship. Yeah. So as our kiddos approach the age of 18, court-appointed legal guardianship may make sense. It may not. It just depends on the situation, depends on the individual. Mm-hmm. If mom and dad do feel like they need that level of decision-making ability, that level of authority, and the easiest way I kind of explain it is when our children are minors, we're in charge
right.
as mom and dad, right? Like we make final decisions and stuff. When they turn 18, that all changes. And the Constitution says nothing about the fact that somebody might be living with autism or Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or what have you, right? There's no disclaimer that says if they're living with a special need, this is different. So when our children turn 18, we no longer have any legal decision-making ability, authority, etc. So if that's something that mom and dad feel like they really do need to have that final say, they need to have those decision-making ability, that's where court-appointed guardianship would make sense for them. And basically it puts them back in control like they were when their child was a minor, except the big difference is that the liability shifts. So when our kiddos are minors and they cause an accident or something happens, as mom and dad, we're going to be on the hook. We're going to be liable for our children. But when our child turns 18 and we become their court-appointed guardian, we're no longer legally liable for their, for their actions. They're still an adult and they will be held accountable for what they need to do. But if we are their guardian, we can walk into the courtroom, we can walk into the jail, we can walk into anywhere and speak on their behalf for them because we have been given that authority through the court system. So we help families through that process as well, too, to get guardianship in place.
Great. Well, it has been such a blessing to be able to talk to you today on our very first podcast.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners where they can find you. It will be in the comments of this podcast, but just maybe tell them the best way to get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I feel very honored to be the first guest. Can't wait to see the rest of the series and the amazing information you're going to bring to families. But
thank you.
So a few different ways to contact us. Our website is Meridian SNP, stands for Special Needs Planning, meridiansnp.com.
Okay.
And then you can also email me at nathan.buckles@meridiansnp.com.
Okay.
And then, we'll have the link to stuff where in the description.
Sure. Yeah.
But and if families do see this and they reach out to us, just go ahead and make sure that they say, hey, we saw you on the podcast or we're connected with APT or what have you, because then we'll honor the free consultation. Okay. There would be no cost or anything.
Awesome. Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
And this concludes our first podcast. We look forward to continuing to provide helpful information to families. And if you like this podcast, go ahead and give us a like and follow. Thanks so much. Have a great day.